You're missing a piece here. We also need cheap transactions. So today, our speakers are going to tell you how we're going to solve something I have called the Hotep Quadlemma. I'd like you to put your hands together, first and foremost, for Near Foundation, Robert Smith. Next up on the stage, representing Syscoin, is Jagdeep Sidhu. Clap it up for him, clap it up for him. Today we are going to start this conversation off with talking about, well, I want to loosen it up a bit. Let's loosen it up a bit first. What I want to talk about is a very important interview question. Whenever you go into a job, they want to ask you and they say, well, what have you messed up? What mistakes have you made? So when I talk to these guys about blockchain tech, let's move over a few seats. Let's get in the center of the stage. Yeah, let's even this out a bit. So I want to start off with Jag. Can you please tell me a time where you messed something up developing your blockchain tech?
Well, back when we started out, we were trying to figure out what belongs on the blockchain, what doesn't belong on the blockchain. Obviously, when you start out, you're thinking, okay, Bitcoin is a great store of value story. It's the money preservation of the future. But what else can you do with this blockchain? How can you bring about utility? So the first thing we thought about was, okay, let's do digital identity, let's do marketplaces, let's do certificates, which are so-called NFTs. And we started to go that way, and we realized quickly that even though we had an innovative strategy to prune stuff off the blockchain in a unique way, you still won't be able to get economies of scale if you're pushing all this stuff as data on the blockchain. Everyone is having to reproduce these databases and resync everything from scratch. At some point, you're going to need a supercomputer to sync up. And we realized that that strategy is not the right way to go. We saw ZK coming in the future, and we're like, okay, well, there's going to be a better way. So the mistake early on was realizing that, even though the blockchain exists and you can throw data into it, you don't necessarily want to throw just every piece of data into it. Just specifically stuff that needs to be double spend protected or stop from people cheating each other from financial transactions is what we found.
Real quick, Robert, raise your hand if you guys understand blockchain technology at an expert level. Okay. Raise your hand if you understand blockchain technology at an intermediate level. Okay. Raise your hand if you understand blockchain at a very basic level. Raise your hand if you have no idea how blockchain works. Okay, all right. Robert, what have you messed up when it comes to blockchain technology?
I actually agree with what he said, because a lot of times, anytime a new tech comes about, we try to shoehorn the old into the new. We try to say, let's do what we've always done and just put it on this new platform. And I think that's a mistake. We should allow the platform to drive the innovation and let the use cases speak for themselves. And we see that every single time, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, let's have an Uber for X, let's have a Shopify for Y, and on and on and on, and that's exactly what happened with the blockchain. Also, I really think that the music and art sector is so desperate for change, so desperate for innovation, so desperate for freedom, that they become the early adopters and the loudest voices. And that's with every platform. And it's the same thing that happened with blockchain. NFTs were embraced early on by the art community, and that became the loudest voice. I really think that obviously we should embrace everyone, but letting NFTs, for example, letting the immutable chain speak for itself and drive the new use cases and allow other voices to rise as well.
There are, in my opinion, the two most important conversations surrounding cryptocurrency. Number one comes down to legal. Gary Gensler, Janet Yellen, FinCEN, CFTC, et cetera, et cetera. What are we going to do to protect the rights of individuals to transact in a diversity of currencies? The second most important, in my opinion, is scalability. How do we process a lot of transactions at a high speed? So I'd like to start off with Robert. You hear this term called TPS. Now, TPS stands for transactions per second. I'd like to know how your technology is going to advance the speed of transactions.
So you just lobbed me a softball because the near chain specializes in horizontal scalability. Near has something called sharding, which allows us to process hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. It's unique in that workloads can be divided up among shards and individually processed instead of every node having an entire copy of the blockchain and processing. So the entire chain becomes the speed of its pretty much its slowest node. With Near is different, and I highly recommend everyone check out the Near project, Near blockchain, because with sharding, it allows you to scale infinitely based on a number of validators, and that's really something unique to Near. We see Ethereum 2 also just implemented sharding as well, but I really think everyone, if you need that kind of scalability, is to look at the Near chain first.
Jack, how do you handle speed of transactions?
The core fundamental tenet of scaling blockchains is you have to avoid the re-execution of transactions. Like if you're having everyone reproduce the same state over and over, it becomes really slow. So as Robert said, you can either split the blockchain up so some nodes are avoiding re-execution of others by separating the state, or you can try to create a modular separation of concerns. In software speak, we try to keep separation of concerns by keeping the system separate, meaning there's no actual information being transferred between the layers. So the Ethereum roadmap is definitely going towards modularity. I think what Near is trying to do is the earlier on roadmap of sharding, execution sharding, where you actually have separate shards executing smart contracts, and when you need to talk to each other, there's a communication in between them. And now what Ethereum and what Syscoin is doing is more of a modular stack where the layer one essentially has just the data availability for censorship resistance for a layer 2, layer 3 roadmap. What that means is you want to move the transactions off of the base layer. I personally think that users will never actually touch layer 1. They'll always be on layer 2 or layer 3. You may use layer 1 maybe once in a while if you're settling, you're going away on a vacation or something like that. So separating the concerns, your layer 1 essentially becomes a court system, and it becomes a data provenance system which stores the critical information required for your exits in order for you to say you've inherited the layer 1 security, moving off to layer 2. When all the transactions are on these separate chains, you definitely avoid the execution on the base layer, and the base layer becomes really cheap and fast, and it's not concerned about having everyone re-execute everything and keep in sync with each other.
Raise your hand if what they're saying is going over your head like carry-on luggage. Okay, so you guys all, okay, just a couple of people here. All right, we'll get there. We're going to get you there. The next piece of the Hotep quadlemma. Actually, raise your hand if you know who Vitalik is. Okay, you guys didn't laugh at my joke earlier when I said he was my student. Oh my God, it must be early. So the next piece is, we've talked about speed of transactions, but we also want the transactions to be cheap. We want low gas fees. How do you create cheap transactions with Syscoin?
So the key issue there is for scalability and for cheap transactions, they go hand in hand, right? The trilemma is connected. You definitely want to create something called economies of scale, which means the more users jump on this thing, the more agents, the more bots jump on this thing, it's got to get cheaper, amortized over the number of users. It's just how every technology stack is scaled, like Web 2, Web 3, doesn't really matter. Even our society has scaled with compliance and legal frameworks. As more people get in the system, it's got to get cheaper and cheaper. Otherwise, if it doesn't scale that way, you end up creating bottlenecks. And so if you have a modular stack where everything happens in one layer, of course it's going to bog down as more users come. Of course it's going to get more expensive. And it doesn't really matter for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's not a utility-based system. It's a store of value. But it does matter for something else that's trying to add on utility through smart contracts. That's where we expect users to come and do transactions daily. They might be involved in some IoT or AI or smart cities sort of transactionality or metaverse or GameFi. But it's got to get cheaper and cheaper because you're going to be using this thing on the daily. So in order for us to do that, there are different ways we're thinking about that. In the modular stack, at least, what the Ethereum roadmap is and what ZK is saying, Starknet, Matter, Polygon, they're all doing this is creating a layer 2 that's going to be decentralized with layer 3s stemming off of that, which means that now the layer 1 actually doesn't even learn about layer 3 really. It's an indirection, and you can put all the users on individual ecosystems like Microsoft, IBM, they can have their own layer 3s. By the way, those could be compliant as well. And offer their own ecosystems without affecting the gas fees of one another. And at that point, you do start to see a semblance of economies of scale. Some of the technologies, there are, and when you get into the layer 2 sort of mindset, there are 2 types of technologies that exist there. There's optimistic rollups, which involve fraud proofs. So someone has to say that you've done something wrong and you have a delay period where you hear something wrong, then you punish that person. Or there's this new technology called zero-knowledge proofs, and we think that's going to really change the world. It's really like a black box where it cannot be wrong. You do your executions in that black box, and you post a proof back to the base chain, and it cannot be wrong. It's guaranteed mathematically to be correct. And that in itself is going to help us scale up the layer 2s and layer 3s and increase economies of scale.
Robert, how do you handle cheap transactions or create them for the people?
I'm actually looking forward to this project and what they're doing. It started as a Bitcoin fork, and to do all of this on top of that is very interesting. So I'm looking forward to what you're doing. I agree with that. With scalability comes cheap transactions. We do it because with the NEAR, the validators can be run on a regular computer. You don't need specialty mining. You don't need ASIC or anything like that. You can run a node on a regular computer. We just had something called Stake Wars, which allowed people who maybe don't have a lot of NEAR to participate. And with that, we just have that economy of scale to allow very, very cheap transactions, sub-penny transactions.
Okay. Now we have to get down to the nitty-gritty. Security. Now, it is my understanding, just give me a head nod, that you represent proof of stake.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And Jag, you are proof of work, right?
I mean, you can have proof of stake running off of proof of work, but at the base layer, yeah, we're proof of work.
Excellent. So I want to know, why did you guys choose proof of stake over proof of work? And then I want to know why you chose proof of work over proof of stake, Jag. We'll start with Robert.
So they started out as a Bitcoin fork, and they're building on top of that. So at the very lowest level is proof of work, but they're building on it. Also, going back and forth between layer 1 and layer 2 does give you a extra security concern, which they are working out. As far as NEAR is concerned, they started as proof of stake, and the proof of work, proof of stake debate will rage on, and we will see what falls out in the next year or so. But it seems that at this point, proof of stake allows cheaper transactions. It allows you to use hardware that's not specialty hardware. And look, it's fashionable. People care about the environment. People care about being green, and that's proof of stake.
Jag, do you see any security risks using proof of stake?
I mean, I think, so the state of the art of proof of stake is you will remove the physical constraint of resource consumption, what I call digitization of work. So you're taking work, putting it to use, but making a digital token out of it. The state of the art of proof of stake is you hold some money, and then you do some work, and other people will keep you honest because you're holding a stake. And at the same time, if you do something wrong, you're punishable. So there are game theoretical attacks to that situation, because now there's more games around being able to bribe people or be able to fake that that person did something wrong, therefore his stake should be slashed. On the other thing, there is also the nothing at stake, and they say slashing actually mitigates that, but I would argue against that. In my mind, nothing comes for free, right? And so if you're taking away the resource consumption and you're replacing it with a staking assumption, what I like to talk about is the proof of work is more inflation resistant. You cannot synthesize energy, right? Energy is something that no matter what the inflation metrics look like with US dollar, it's going to cost more and more to extract that same amount of energy. Where proof of stake is really backed by whatever the instrument is the global economy is using to barter, so if it's US dollar today. In the sense of hyperinflation happening with the US dollar, the energy consumption cost will go up and the staking costs will go down. The ratio between something like Bitcoin and ETH will tend towards infinity in that situation if the theory is correct. But in the same scenario, how expensive will it be to attack something like NEAR or ETH? It's still going to be astronomical, because at that point, the cost of attack is still fairly large. You will still lose a lot of money if you try to attack that. And is it going to be useful to attack? Why would you attack? Why would you throw money away? But if the ratio is tending towards infinity, Bitcoin, Satoshis, you can start to attack it cheaper and cheaper. At some point, there's a threshold where it becomes really cheap to attack. Now, how useful is that? And the takeaway from the ETH community, the proof of stake community, is they can simply reset the system. If something happens, that you can fork out these bad actors, and it will reset the system. And proof of work, it's meant to be anti-fragile in that if you're doing a 51% attack and you borrow all this energy to be able to attack Bitcoin, all you can really do is censor the blockchain. In that scenario, it fixes itself over time. You're going to put a lot of money, buy a lot of energy. It's going to cost you a lot of money, more money than yesterday because of hyperinflation, if that's the scenario you're playing out. And at the same time, it fixes itself. There's no fork needed because the proof of work system finds the longest chain over time. In proof of stake, there's really no such thing as longest chain.
I agree with that. One thing to add on to that is proof of stake is inherently centralized, and it's up to each chain and their foundations to force decentralization in something that's inherently centralized, and that's the whole idea of the blockchain, to be decentralized. So you have human beings behind it forcing decentralization to something that is easily centralized, and that is going to be a huge deal. You're going to see it in the next few months. Some chains out there are, because of their centralization, may not make it.
So there's
Let's clarify the metric of decentralization here. I think that's important for the audience here. When you're talking about decentralization, how do you measure that? And what we call that something called Nakamoto coefficient, right? It's how many groups or how many different sorts of nodes or different sorts of softwares does someone have to consume or collude with to break such a system? And I personally think that in proof of work, because you're going to be reproducing your own state, you're not trusting anyone else, you're not able to collude with others to change the state of the system, aside from being the miner. You actually increase the Nakamoto coefficient every time you run a node, right? Because you are your own security model. You are your own bank. In the staking model, you can technically collude with others. There's the Nakamoto coefficient is actually a lot less. Every time you run a node, it's the group of validators, the group of stakers that actually become one, a value of one of the Nakamoto coefficient. Whereas in Bitcoin, it would be each node is going to increase. If we in the common speak, the software is actually one piece of thing that could be attacked as well. But that's the same in proof of stake or proof of work. If there's a bug in the software, the entire system breaks. But if we assume that the software is safe, then every person that runs a node is going to increase that coefficient and therefore become more decentralized. And that's what I mean by inflation resistance and stuff, because you're not going to be able to trick other people into running fake consensus in Bitcoin. It's going to be much harder and much easier if it's cheaper and cheaper. My same Satoshis go farther and farther to try to help someone collude. That's the concern. How viable that attack is, it's really up to the academics to prove that out, but there is something there that proves that it becomes cheaper and cheaper to attack if the base common denominated currency for barter is hyperinflating.
Wealth inequality is a huge problem in America. A lot of people are complaining about it. As we wind down here, it's about a minute left. Your 30-second pitch on how proof of stake isn't going to widen that gap of wealth inequality. Jag? Or might attribute to it.
Yeah, like the wealth, I think in the mining model, it's the barrier of entry comes from who's able to mine, and the wealth inequality there is on the mining side. Whereas on the blockchain, proof of stake, the blockchain nodes running the staking validators actually increase create that segregation. So I think in both systems, there is a little bit of inequality. There's a first mover advantage. In our scenario, like we try to create our tokenomics to cater towards population growth. So in our view, we don't want to follow the Bitcoin philosophy of everything has to go up only over time exponentially, because at that point, people are going to be priced out no matter what the gas fees are, no matter if you offer economies of scale. That one Satoshi ends up being equivalent of $1 million, for example. It doesn't make sense. You need to figure out what it looks like in a utility perspective. And for us, we try to model our tokenomics based on population growth. So 1%, around 1%, and it's going down over time. And we feel that is a good metric for long-term, long-term tokenomics model that removes that segregation.
Robert, how do you feel about the potential of wealth inequality in the blockchain tech, POS, POW?
Well, with Near, like I said, you can mine on regular hardware, you can run a node, you can stake on regular hardware. So it really opens it up to people who maybe not have specialty hardware, they don't have ASICs. Anyone with a laptop can do something with Near, and that is the big difference between the arms race that's happening on the proof of work side.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Snowball Effect Scalability. Clap it up for Jag and Robert, please. My name is Hotep Jesus. We have our lovely hostess coming to the stage. Thank you very much for watching.